Hello, wonderful teachers, and thanks for joining us again for a small episode of what we've been calling Specific Drip. We're featuring the skills and abilities of each other in the ELA program in secondary schools here in Kansas City Public, with the goal, I think, of noticing some successes and also talking about how those have happened, and also celebrating maybe our chance to think about doing that in our own buildings with a little bit of oomph from some people who feel like they're doing it well. So I'm joined today by two wonderful educators, Principal Amicone and Assistant Principal Millar. They're both representing from what school? Garfield. I know that. I'm not pretending I don't. I get to go there quite often. And so we'll start with that. I'm invited to a weekly PLC at their building that I would say always feels extremely professional and targeted, and pointing toward the goals of having really good data conversations. And I think teachers come out of those meetings with a really precise goal and a really precise conversation about, last week. So I know that's something a lot of districts and schools are seeking to build in their schools. And sometimes it helps to hear from somebody who has been through this process. So we're joined by those two instrumental creators and designers, I think, at their building. So let's let them take it away. Take us way back to when you guys were building this process, and will help us think about how to get started.
So I think our PLC process is actually fairly new. Both Miss Millar and I came to Garfield. This is our first year at Garfield. And so we really took what we had learned in other buildings, both inside of the district and outside of KCPS, to really think strategically about how we could make PLCs a priority at Garfield. So that began even, on the first day of teacher reporting, really identifying and going through procedures in terms of creating our collective commitments and norms, which we return to every single PLC. So each teacher was able to identify a norm that they would want to see take place, as well as a collective commitment. And then we went through processes where we joined together, sorted what they had come up with, identified through this procedure of like, okay, what are the 4? Now let's narrow it down to 2. Now let's narrow it down to 1 within table teams. And really we're able to bring that to the forefront as this is what the Garfield way is going to be in terms of commitments, and then norms. And then we started PLCs the very first day of school. So Chelsea came on the very first day of school and met with our 3rd and 4th grade team, and they continued to add and tweak throughout that very first week, setting the foundation for really important and meaningful, and I think being connected. So if I'm in 4th grade, this is what we're bringing forward. Now the very next group, which 3rd grade met right after them, they were able to add and subtract from that list throughout that first week, where by the end of the week, every single grade level and every single teacher had been able to provide input and into what our norms and commitments would be.
Fantastic. So that was very intentional to make sure that everyone had voice and was on board, and also starting it so early. Why do you think that's so important to just jump in from the very beginning?
I would just add to what Principal Amicone just said. I mean, the process really started even before school had began, in that Lauren had taken the time to build into our schedule actual specific release time for teachers outside of their planned time for PLC each week. That way it's a sacred time in the schedule. It's something everyone plans on. It's expected. And so it was instrumental then to start that the first day of school, to just establish we're always going to make PLCs a priority in our week. And that starts day 1, because our focus has to be on the learning that's taking place in our building, not just the teaching, and getting a really clear idea of what the data looks like for how our kids are doing. So I think setting that tone day 1 really helped to carry over into how people treated that PLC time and the attitude we brought towards those meetings.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, and so I've been there to experience one. Will you kind of run us through what, a day in the life, a quick fast forward of what we go on in, we're coming in discussing, what we're going out discussing, what documents maybe we're filling out, what trail we're leaving behind, so that we do have kind of a way to even dialogue about lots of things that don't just go back into the air. Anybody want to speak to that, of just kind of like what it's like for one session?
Yeah, so in addition to there being a weekly agenda, which I'll have Ms. Millar walk you through in a second, we also mapped it out through the whole school year in terms of, for this section of weeks, we'll be working on reading, for this section of weeks, we'll be working on math. And so each quarter, we're able to have 4 to 6, depending on how long the quarter is, consistent time with both of those subjects, which allows us continual touch points with teachers and teams. I think another critical piece is really in terms of scheduling. It's not only the classroom teachers that are there, but also the ELL teachers that are supporting it. So you sometimes come to our 6th grade where they're departmentalized and they're breaking off, ELA more with you, math more with myself and our instructional coach. But like in kindergarten, where they're teaching across all subjects, we actually have 6 teachers that are there every single week. Well, 7 actually. Our 3 classroom teachers, 3 ELL teachers, and our reading interventionists. And so it provides a really robust group of people to really dialogue about data, in addition to our instructional coach, who is always there, as well as Ms. Millar, our VP, who is always there. And that sort of leaves me on call to handle any of those issues that happen, in the business of school. But it provides that consistent face of everyone knows always Miss Button and Miss Millar will be there. And then I do my very best to also be present and dialogue around student outcomes and teacher actions. So then on a weekly basis, there's a very specific schedule or agenda that is followed, which I'll let Ms. Millar speak to, because she never, ever misses one of the meetings.
No, not at all. I've been there enough to know that. And also just knowing that I've heard a lot of thought partners in the meetings that I've been to. So I think it's neat where, the core teacher is definitely going to have people surrounding that you wish weren't just down the hallway, or I wish they could be here kind of moments. And so I think that's especially poignant because I know it feels that way. I feel like an extra thinker instead of a like I would have to be there for it to happen. And so I think your team being there together that way, it's more guaranteed. It's really a good idea. So let's go back to this agenda for one session, because I know you guys have worked to tweak it to be a good use of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Lauren really touched on it when she just described kind of the global view, but really the consistency and knowing what to expect when you come to those meetings is really key. So regardless of what content we're going to be discussing, be it reading, science, math, it's always the same agenda for everyone. That way we know exactly what to expect in those meetings. And I think has really helped us to get our timing down too, because practice, makes progress. So we've really been able to kind of perfect our timing and being able to ensure we're touching on all the important pieces through each of those meetings. So when we come together, the thing we always start with is our celebrations. This was really important to us in being able to recognize places where we are seeing growth, celebrate things that are happening in our building. And I think just sets the tone of being able to bring everybody in on a positive note, because you can so easily lose sight of those things as you get into data discussions. So always making that a priority, starting with that first. We always review our norms, and every person will make a commitment for when they're going to prioritize that day, just because I think it's important to continually come back to those things. Again, in establishing the tone for those meetings, making sure we're focused on those things that we've all committed to. We do use the 4 questions from that Learning by Doing book, the DeFores. We use those same 4 questions, but we actually touch on them in a different order than is put forth in the book. where we always start with our data first. So we will bring in a common formative assessment, and we'll first start by discussing what the data was from each classroom, getting really specific with numbers about how many students scored a certain percentage or amount on the common formative assessment and what our overall proficiency looks like, talking about some high-level trends we've noticed, so what those implications then are of that data, or what strategies we think would be useful in moving forward with our students based on what we've seen. And then really it's a collaborative conversation about what are we going to do for students who have not yet learned, and what will we do for students who are already demonstrating that proficiency. That just kind of helps to create a cycle, I think, then, so that at the end of our meeting, what we do is create our next common formative assessment. So that's where we come back to those questions 1 and 2. What do we want students to learn? How are we going to know that they learned it? That way, when we come back, we again are able to reflect on the data and plan forward. I think just doing it in that order sets up a really good cycle each time. And again, by lots of repeated practice, we're able to touch on the 4 questions in one meeting, which I think is really powerful. And then as far as the common formative assessments go, being able to actually sit there and plan and create those together during that time just really helps set up that accountability. We sat here, we made it together, so there is no barrier to being able to implement that this week. And utilizing our Illuminate platform as well as a way to create those assessments so that students get an extra at bat with that technology.
Fantastic. And I would say shout out to the teachers who are part of these PLCs. We're talking to the people that are encouraging these conversations, but we know the teachers are doing a lot of the thinking and a lot of the processing, or else it isn't really a PLC, right? It's just a meeting where we wait for it to be over. And I would say I've definitely heard very specific takeaways, like data in, data out. I've heard really precise discussions about what the barriers to certain skills are, or just like, a 2-part question, and really uncovering like specific names of students that we're going to help, not just generalities. And I think because that keeps happening, it's fun to think that way, to get analytical, to dig deeper. And it's so encouraging to hear, because it's, we can't fix everything and attend to everything all the time, but we can pick specific things and really feel like we're getting somewhere. So I think that's a really good lesson to some who might be wondering, how do I, purpose this process? How do I really funnel it? And I really do like the way you changed the order of DeFore's 4 questions to be kind of, information in, information out, and kind of setting you up in a really logical way to just walk out the door and feel ready, or at least the start of ready. Now you're going to go get more ready, but that was the catalyst that started it all up. So that's wonderful. I appreciate you guys sharing your process. Do you have anything else that you think is maybe some wisdom that you've learned over the course of doing it this year, that other people could, you could pay them forward, a little bit of advice? We don't have to tell them what not to do, but maybe what to do.
Yeah, so I think something that's seen sort of iterations throughout the year on our agenda is really the specificity of the commitment. So the final piece that each teacher that leaves the meeting each week is they make a commitment for how they're going to move the scoreboard that following week. So like really thinking about how specifically am I going to move data the following week. And get really narrowing down into what is the plan, who, what, when. I think before that was a little vague, like, oh, I'm going to teach curriculum. Well, yes, we know that. But if that's all that we do, then we'll continue to have kids that aren't mastering this material like we saw, each week. And so really getting specific into like, I'm going to this week hold a foundational skills small group with these 3 kids working on XYZ item. Like I'm going to have working on short vowels, or I'm going to meet with these 2 kids to really shore up their understanding of this math skills so that they'll be able to have more success later. And because those are getting more and more specific, and teachers are making commitments to those, then it allows for increased, accountability and learning over time. Like And teachers are able to come and be like, yeah, I did that. And this is what happened. Like, I see progress being made. And sometimes that is really student specific, looking at who are those few students that didn't perform well the week before. And sometimes it's more holistic, like thinking about on maybe a writing exit ticket, students really struggled. So now the next week, like, how am I going to provide a scaffold, whether it's a normed sentence stem across a class or even a grade level, so that we can continue to build those skills, and students are concentrating their energy and cognition onto the work of the problem rather than the work of like, how do I formulate my thoughts on this topic?
Awesome. Great example. How about Miss Millar? Any wisdom that has come from this year's process?
I would say just adding to that, the preparation is key. Coming prepared with your data already entered in our tracker, having already taken the time to reflect on that and look for trends, especially the piece of bringing the student work samples with you, having them available there in the meeting. I mean, we've seen really powerful conversations of, sitting down with actual work samples and sorting them based on, different skills or different trends we're seeing, and being able then on the spot to create new small groups for the following week and divvying out responsibilities for who's going to meet with these students. None of that work can really happen without the preparation of our teachers. And we've just, an amazing level of commitment from our staff this year, I would say, and really committing to the purpose and the power behind these meetings to be able to move students. So like you said, Chris, just that collaboration is so important. The more voices that we can bring to the table and use our collective capacity to help grow our students. But again, none of that work can really happen unless we get really clear on what the focus for these meetings are and making sure we're doing what we need to be prepared to have those PLCs each week.
Fantastic. It's a lot about, what we kind of considered just, I taught forever, getting ready earlier and earlier as you get better, and being more ready and more ready as the year goes on, because you learn how to, pay your own energy forward. And that's fantastic, because I don't know if the year always feels that way. It sometimes feels just like, when is it over? And the pile gets bigger and heavier and weightier. And I don't know that it would feel that way with such a cool, unified group as much if you just went in your room and sulked and said, I don't know what to do, I'm overwhelmed. And I think that's a solution, not forever, that we can't continue to do that. We have to find a way to unify and support each other. So I feel that when I'm there, and I think that's one reason I wanted to see if we could pull off this interview. So thank you so much for sharing your insights. Those who are listening, you can hear that it happened from like a lot of work and a lot of process and a lot of commitment, a lot of togetherness, not anyone doing any one thing all by themselves. So thank you again for modeling that strategy and bringing it to life. So we're signing off today. This has been Specific Drip. I'm Chris Odom, ELA coordinator at KC Public. Get a hold of me if you would like to share a skill or a strategy that you think would be helpful in our schools. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Thank you.